Call our meeting to order. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start right away with the roll call. Honey?
Director Stavera?
Here.
Director Atwater?
Here.
Director Palmer?
Here.
Director Boyce?
Here. Okay, now you can join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start right off with public comment. And I have Ms. Missouri.
I was actually going to comment on the staff report update, if that's okay, 7B.
Oh, sorry about that. I'll call you back up then. Well, I have no other requests to address us.
May I request?
So we'll move right along real fast and quickly.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. That's okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And I just wanted to say I became aware that the Department of Water Resources fact sheet, Delta Conveyance Q&A, has an error. They say that the North Delta is all above 15 feet elevation. And the fact is, at Hood, that's the level of the top of the Sacramento River levee. Hood is actually at 7 to 8 feet elevation. Cortland is -1 to 3 feet of elevation. And the bottom of the Sacramento River is below 20 feet below low water at Suisun Bay. So if any of you have gotten the information that the North Delta is 15 feet above sea level and you don't need to worry about sea level rise affecting the North Delta because of it, it's not, it's based on inaccurate elevation information. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope you shared it with the department. We'll move right along then to our approval of the minutes of our last meeting, July 13th.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Sorry, July 18th. Those for the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. We don't have anything on the consent calendar this afternoon, so we'll go right to our discussion items. DCA Staffing Workshop.
Director Estamera, I would like to introduce Diane Pittman with MWD, who has been supporting us on this HR transition.
All right.
Great.
Thank you,
Good afternoon,
Catherine.
Diane.
Yes, good afternoon, members of the board. I'm here to talk about the overall human resources plan. It's a discussion, it's an education, so hopefully we'll get some good comments from the board on this process. But the whole purpose of my presentation is to discuss the possibility of structuring the DCA with employees and consultants. To help with that discussion, we're going to go over a proposed organizational chart. We'll review a salary approach, benefits approach, and then have some feedback and direction from this board. To start, let me do that here. One thing we like to start with is costs. And as all employees have benefits costs, it's good to know that the standard is between 30 to 45% of someone's salary is equating to the cost of employee benefits costs. When you compare that to a consultant, consultant compensation also has a markup, and that ranges anywhere between 50 to 200% for benefits and administrative services. So in general, hiring employees of the DCA should reduce the overall costs. And to go into some more specifics about the organizational structure that Catherine has put together, you'll see that the thought would be to employ approximately 8 employees in the beginning. These employees are those that will provide adequate oversight of critical decision making, like the chief engineer position, or eliminate potential conflicts of interest or perceived conflicts of interest, like the procurement and payments. And also these positions would have significant external engagement. And then over the next 3 years, add approximately 12 more positions, with a maximum of approximately 40 positions staffing the DCA. And then, of course, upon completion of the scope of work, the JPA will dissolve and those employees will either separate or return to their previous employer. In addition to using employees, of course, we'd still use consultants. Some of them would be an extension of the DCA staff, like our Chief Legal Counsel, Josh, or serve as an expert consultant in a specialized area, like the feature design consultant, as some examples. Now, this org chart is high level, and I wasn't going to go through it in a lot of detail, but you can see that the 8 positions that would probably be the first hired would be those that report directly to Catherine in that box. Moving on to salary ranges. So best practice shows that broad salary ranges are the way to go to provide opportunity for annual increases. They should be based on market data, but also internal equity, and so that way it's very transparent how the salaries have been set. And of course, to make sure you get the best individuals to work on this project, they should be highly competitive with pay and benefits from a total compensation approach. So we usually start off with finding comparators to do market analysis. These 7 agencies were chosen based on the member agencies of this board, but also adding additional similar water agencies that we think would have good matches in terms of the specific jobs that we have in the DCA project. I wanted to show an example of market comparison. What we did is we surveyed those 7 agencies, and we're using the sustainability manager as an example. And you can see that each agency there has a specific title for the same level of job. We put in the minimum, the midpoint, and the maximum, and calculated an average. And please note that all of these agencies do have a defined pension or benefit program, which will be important when we get to the total compensation discussion. Now, from this slide, you can go into other ways of breaking down the data. And this is an agency choice, really. So you'll see that we can do it into quartiles, where we take those 7 comparators, create a 25th percentile, 50th percentile, etc. Regardless of how you decide or where you decide to peg your market, from there we can create a range. And standard best practice is to create a range between 30% or 40%. So you can see an example that I used was taking the 50th percentile midpoint and creating a spread or a range of 30% from minimum to maximum. And then the second example, I did the same thing with the 50th percentile midpoint, but I used a 40% range, just so you can have some examples of how you think it could be done. Any questions on that part? Okay.
I guess one thing I'm just thinking about in terms of knowing that this is a temporary position for everybody, us included. Just to be careful how we have the severance in terms of no golden parachutes or anything like that, because that could get us into a world of trouble, I would think, financially.
What, no golden parachute, not for us either?
No, yeah, burlap one, I don't
Maybe
know.
a double for us.
That's a good point, Director Palmer. I would also say that when I look at this organization, I would want to make sure there's no long-term costs associated with it, since it would be dissolving at some point in the
Yeah,
future.
I mean, we want to make it so that we can do a clean dissolve, basically.
Correct. You'll hear about that a little bit more. Yes, Director
So,
Bliss.
to that end, the difference between a defined benefit and defined contribution plan. If we have defined benefit plans, does that, is there a way to stop that when we dissolve, or does that continue on?
It does continue on, and I have a slide that talks about that, but what you should know is the liability sticks with the agency or the member agencies of the JPA. So it would transfer down to the agencies that you represent here at the table. So it's something to keep in mind, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Any other questions? Okay. Then I'll move on to benefits. So to set up a benefits program, normally you would hire a broker, do an analysis, but there's a great opportunity to partner with the Aqua JPIA. If you haven't heard of the Aqua JPIA, they are an organization that provides health benefits to many, many water agencies of all sizes. The direct contract provision within section C64 of the DCA will allow you to contract directly with the GPIA. We have researched with the GPIA that they do provide medical, dental, and vision, and life, which is very similar to the agencies that are part of the DCA, but also the competitors. They also provide workers' compensation benefits and comprehensive liability insurance. And the main thing that JPIA does is it helps make the rates competitive because you're pulling larger and larger groups of individuals to make the rates lower.
One other thing that they also do is that if at the end of the year there's like leftover stuff, they redistribute it back.
So they give back
which-
premiums?
Yeah, they do.
Nice. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I've served on the Aqua JPA board. It's got a long history of integrity and working well with all the different water utilities.
Okay, so moving on from health and benefits to retirement options. So just to show you what all the options are, of course, there's the PERS or other defined benefit option, which would be a 2% at 62 formula based on the recent change in law. There is an option for a 401A defined contribution retirement option, which is an employer contribution plan only. The maximum you can do in 1 year is $56,000. And then, of course, there's the 457 defined contribution plan, which is employee or employer with a maximum up to $19,000. Kind of going back to Director Boyce's question and comparing the benefits of a defined benefit to a defined contribution, first thing is that, like we said earlier, the DCA or its member agencies would have the long-term liability for the benefit. But also, there's a really good chance that PERS would not allow us to become a PERS agency because of the eventual dissolution of the DCA. So then you look at the 401A and the 457 defined contribution retirement options, and there's a couple of perks to this. One, the liability is with the employee, and what I mean by that is once you've contributed to their fund, it is their responsibility to manage. With a pension or a defined benefit, you have a long-term liability where if you don't earn enough, you have to put more into the plan. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but I wanted to make sure that it was clearly described here so you can understand the pros and cons. Also, from an employee hiring perspective, it allows the DCA to hire retired PERS employees without having to have annuitant limitations of 960 hours. And that might be a really great employment source for you based on the scope of this project. And then, of course, it does give you a lot of flexibility to design the contribution. 56,000 is the max. You can find any number within there that you would think would be competitive when comparing this benefit to a pension benefit. Any questions about that?
So if you do the defined contribution, the defined contribution action, do you have to choose a 401A or a 457?
You could actually do both.
So we could set it up where the employee could choose which one he preferred?
You could do that. I would suggest you probably have a 457 option maybe for the employees if they want to contribute for a tax benefit to them, and then have the 401A as an offset to not providing a defined benefit or a pension. Yes, but the employer would be more focused on the 401A.
Yeah, I can understand why PERS wouldn't want to have us there,
Yeah.
because, I mean, we're maybe, hopefully we'll get our stuff done within my lifetime.
Right.
And and then we can,
Right.
everybody can just move on and be clean. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions about that? So then the next steps would be, if this process is something that you are interested in, we would come back to the September 19th board meeting and adopt a resolution to join AQUA and then adopt a resolution to join AQUA JPIA. We'd have to designate one DCA board member to serve on the AQUA and AQUA JPIA boards, and designate an alternate board member, which could be the executive director or a DCA board member. And then on the November 5th AQUA JPI board meeting, we will attend to confirm our membership. And as you know, they don't do a lot of membership opportunities throughout the year, so it's a little bit of a timing issue. But again, even if we did this in September and went in November, this could be made in a future effective date. So it doesn't need to be made until we're ready to move forward with actual hiring of employees. And the recommendation is really for today, the board to decide that we should continue to look into optimizing the mix of employees and consultants for the good of the project. Return September 19th with resolutions to join the AQUA and AQUA JPIA. Return October 17th with some more specific structures for salary and benefits as a recommendation. And then, of course, as mentioned in previous meetings, all prospective hires will be brought to the board before any job offers are made. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
You kind of took care of mine as you went along.
No?
No, I think
That
it's
seems
a good
like we-
question.
Yes, did you have a question?
So, yeah, on some comments, I think,
Yes.
number one, I totally agree with the philosophy of moving forward with direct employees, because I believe strongly that our first and most important job is to put in place that core group of folks who are going to lead the rest of the project. And I want Catherine to have the best opportunity to hire the best and brightest that she possibly can without having to juggle around other impediments. So my objective is to remove all impediments and let her do her job. Does this, what you're proposing to do, allow her to do that?
I believe it does. It's all in how it's designed, because the competitiveness factor we still have to analyze. Encouraging an employee to give up their pension plan to come work at this agency might take something in the 401A area, but we'll look at that and we'll come back with a recommendation in October to make sure she has that flexibility.
I don't want to give away the farm.
Right.
But on the other hand, I want to be able to hire the best and the brightest, because quite frankly, not to do so is, we're not going to have a successful
Got a big
project.
job.
Once we get the go-ahead from DWR, I mean, we want to be able to move quickly
Yeah.
and not have to dilly-dally around and waste everybody's time.
That's our goal, is to have everything ready to go. Any other questions?
Well, great. I think we're all in.
I would put one other bit of input. Based upon what I've heard, it makes perfect sense to move ahead with the defined contribution plan and not the defined benefit, if we possibly can.
That's my feeling is too.
Yeah, and obviously, we've talked about this in the past with our legal counsel. We're not likely to get approval from CalPERS, so it's kind of academic, but I agree with that
Well, it
recommendation.
gives her a bigger pool too to
Yeah.
pick from.
And I worked at an agency where we had a 401A, 457. It's flexible, it provides a lot of benefits to the employees, and it works out well.
I'll take that direction and bring it back as part of my recommendation.
Yeah,
Right,
we're all on the same page on that one.
thank you.
Thanks. Excellent. All right, the next agenda item was the monthly board report. I just had a couple of comments on that. I don't need to necessarily pull it up on the screen. But we're about two-thirds of the way through completing our policies and procedures, this 90-day plan we launched, and we're hoping by the end of September, we've got them all drafted and we're ready to start training. So that's been a huge lift, huge effort by the team. In terms of costs and budget, we've committed about close to 70 million of the 82 million that was approved for this fiscal year. And we anticipate about another 3.5 million in additional commitments this year around new contracts that are in the report. So we are on target to maintain, remaining under budget for the year. Don't anticipate any contingency draws. And then we continue to meet with stakeholders in the Delta. I found these meetings extremely informative, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing the dialogue out there. And one last note, the schedule is not in the report yet. I am hoping that we can get that finalized in the next month and then begin reporting on that in the next monthly report. So as soon as we have a final baseline schedule, we'll start updating you on that. And did any of you have any questions about the report?
It's starting to shape up. They're going to have the links so you can press on
Yeah,
one of
it's
the
getting a
banners at
little
the
better.
top and it'll go right to the part you want and all that stuff.
Is that not working on your
Well,
version?
maybe when I transferred it over because I wasn't sure.
Oh, okay, yeah, we'll work on that. Sorry about that.
That's a good format.
Yep.
Yeah, it's great.
You sure it has the information you're all
like it,
looking
yes.
for?
I like the organization,
Good,
clear and transparent.
good, excellent.
Well done.
Yeah, it's important to have as much information as we can so that we can share with the community. I really appreciate it. Very thorough. Catherine, I know that you mentioned, at least to me, that you felt that we should, as board members, probably take advantage of being up here for board meetings and then maybe have some office hours afterward where we can schedule meetings with just folks in the community that want to visit with us. I think that's a good idea. I just mentioned it for my board members because, we'll all have to make arrangements. I'll take a little train and you guys take a little plane. And
Not tonight, I have a
you
Mahoney
drive.
to go to.
No, I think it'll be a little while yet before we start, but just so we're all on the same page and prepared.
Yeah, we're one day out from everybody seeing me totally hennaed here.
Great.
I appreciate that. I think
I think
stakeholders would as well.
Ms. Preserve had I think this was what you wanted to address, B, 7B.
Sure, thank you.
Good afternoon, yes.
My name is Osha Meserve, and I'm here on behalf of local agencies of the North Delta. Just had a few comments on the board report. First, on the engineering aspect of it, I mean, I think from what I can see in the board report, the JPA is very focused still on the single tunnel alternative. If folks are working on anything other than a North Delta tunnel that deprives our region of the fresh water that we need to have a healthy delta, please let us know. We understand that to be a mandate of the executive order, and we think you should be working on that. Secondly, with respect to stakeholder engagement, that really is only meaningful if the input's taken into account, and the local agencies that I know aren't very interested in helping you guys make a better North Delta tunnel. We should be open to more other alternatives, which I think there are many, and I hope that's part of what you'll be pursuing. The measure of success wouldn't be the number of meetings, but the progress toward a collaborative solution that could be acceptable to everyone. Third, on the budget, there is a problem with the temporary funding coming from DWR to hold over this agency and fund it. It says per JIPA. I don't think the JIPA authorizes it, and I know that a single tunnel is not part of the State Water Project. It's not part of the authorized expenditures of DWR. It's also two-tunnel project is not part of the State Water Project either. To the extent that was authorized by Project Order 40, that's been rescinded. So because of these issues, I understand there have been inquiries into DWR to explain why these forwarding of funds from the State Water Project is happening toward this agency. So I don't believe you have a funding source unless your member agencies are ponying up the money now toward a project which, again, hasn't been defined. So we're still very concerned about where you're heading. We'd like you to slow down and take into account some of the options and work with folks on a collaborative solution. So, when you're ready to do that, let us know.
Thank you. 7C, consider passing resolution authorizing investment policy and annual delegation.
No.
Yes.
Some,
Questions?
You got some questions?
I have some questions about the investment policy.
Yes.
Okay, part of my issue with the investment policy, and I'm looking at, let me get my notes, I got notes here. Part of this was that, it was on page 43 of 106, and that was where it says, I just want to make sure I get the right place, 41, 2, and 3. There it is. Okay, where it says delegation of authority. This is where I was having a little heartburn on this one. Because it says responsibility for the investment program is specifically delegated by the board to the board-appointed treasurer. That's fine. Where I don't really like this is no such appointment has been made to the executive director, hereinafter referred to as treasurer. I don't want to see Catherine have to be overburdened with these sorts of...
I think that may be an instance where perhaps for some reason you don't have a treasurer.
Yeah, we can put in
Right.
a treasurer.
Right.
I just don't want to see Catherine get overburdened with these, the investment stuff, because there's no telling how long that could last or what's going on.
Well, let me just say one thing, and it's in the presentation. For all practical purposes, the DCA doesn't really have investable funds.
Right.
It's just the
I know,
business
it's a
model
moot
we
point.
have.
It is a moot point. We have no investable funds. But I don't want to put in writing someplace something that, if we should ever have investable funds, which is really, they're not there. But nonetheless, I don't want to see that kind of a concentration of responsibilities for one person who already has a tremendous amount of responsibility and is getting pulled 6 ways from Sunday anyway. So that's my only part that I would like to leave out of there.
Well, I think what it's doing is making sure that somebody's responsible in the event
Yeah,
that
but-
you don't have a treasurer, or you haven't made the delegation to a treasurer.
Yeah, but I think we need to, if
Then the board would need to
we have a
keep it.
treasurer, and if something happens to you, you decide to, you win the lottery and you're going off on the giant cruise of your lifetime, that,
Make sure you
we'll-
take us.
We'll find another treasurer, but I just don't want to see that, because it doesn't give any limitation on that one. I don't want to see that kind of distillation of concentration of
Okay, we can
duties.
strike it.
And that was my only point on that, because I think it was there, and it was also mentioned where it was showing some of the changes. It was on page 43, it was also on page 64.
Because there's a red line.
Yeah, on the red
Yeah,
line.
well, the
first.
red line is just showing the changes, so.
Sure. So I would like to just get rid of that
Okay.
part, and then I would be more than willing to support it.
Good.
Just to clarify for the record, then, the language that's stricken would start at the or and go through the next treasurer. So
Right.
it would so we would delete or if no such appointment has been made to the executive director
Hereinafter
referred
refers
to as
to will
treasurer.
establish procedures for investment program, okay? Because the investment policy is fine. I mean, we went through an investment policy, established one, and it's fine, although we have no investments, as you know. But yeah, everything else in that one was just great, but I just don't want to see that kind of concentration.
No, absolutely, just makes sense. I just wanted to clarify the
Okay.
stricken language for the record.
Yeah.
So I'll
Thank you.
make the motion with that specific change. with that
Then I
strikeout.
second it.
All right, any discussion, any questions, Steve? Okay, looks like we're all in agreement. Those in motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed say no. Policy is adopted. And we now have the executive director's report.
Thank you, Director Estamera. Just a couple of highlights. I want to focus on the engineering work just a little bit. Continuing to collect existing information and doing some foundational engineering work to help inform any future alternatives that come out of the scoping process. For example, we've received some geotechnical data from DWR and collecting from other sources so we can help build a model of underground conditions. And we are beginning to look at logistics issues, largely focused on how materials and equipment and workers may be moved and transported around the Delta area. So all of these are in preparation for the upcoming process. Do any of you have any questions about the report?
Oh, let's see, I did, hang on just a second, let me think about this. It was page 92,
92.
yeah, it says,
Is that long this month?
92 page
it was 106 pages.
Oh,
And I
okay.
actually read it, yeah. It was hot outside, okay?
Okay, I got it. Here we go.
Okay, so, it talked about the geotech team ramping up,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to know how we're coordinating with DWR actions. I mean, last time, I think it was last time, somebody was saying, hey, we've seen them making, drillings in terms of doing some core samples and that. And
Yeah.
I guess DWR had said that we don't need a permit for this, and some judge or other said, yes, we do need a permit for that. And I'm wondering how we're coordinating with DWR on the geotech type of ramping up.
Yeah, so right now, the way that we're coordinating with them is they are doing the environmental documentation that we need to have permission to go out and do drilling next year. And then right now, what we're doing is working very closely on identifying any entity that has existing geotechnical borehole data and trying to collect all of that so that we can build our model. So we're very closely engaged right now in that work, but
So basically, we're not reinventing the wheel on everything.
absolutely not, no. Taking advantage of every piece of data that we have.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. All right.
Is there a substantial existing database?
There is data, there's like a high concentration of data in certain specific locations for things that were either planned or did get built, but in terms of area-wide, what we want to do is use our future boring work to kind of fill in all those gaps so that we have a broad map in preparation for a range of
Yeah,
alternatives.
Some well drillings may actually have have the profile already.
Yeah, it's just a matter of getting them, holes, the most valuable are the ones that are deep enough to get below our tunnel. So, that's talking about going at least 150
Yes, we know
feet
what the
deep.
substrate is. up
Yeah,
there.
exactly. So we've got some that are a bit shallower than that.
Okay.
So,
And then I guess at some point, yeah, I know we're still dealing as to what the corridors are, but I'm so confused as to what the corridors are. I want to see this, I want to see some, I want
Yeah.
to think about these things.
I do too. Can't wait.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what having basically DWR is doing the IR, then they'll see about getting the permits, and then we follow through with them and do our thing, right?
Yeah,
Is that
you
what we're
need CEQA coverage
Yeah,
to
okay.
do the exploration. So
Okay.
that's, and Carrie's been working with her team to do that for the program. And I think we're looking at January having those approvals in hand.
Oh, good, okay.
Yeah, so we can begin. That it? I just want to take an opportunity to just thank Carrie for being here and DWR's desire to use this available forum to keep the public informed on what's going on with the environmental planning work. I think it demonstrates a desire for all of us to be transparent, and I personally am really looking forward to providing the engineering support under her leadership. I think it's the first month has been terrific, and I think we've got a pretty good team here. So I'm glad that she's agreed to come to these monthly meetings and hear Director
Yes.
Tony's good jokes and share her progress with the public.
Great, yes, thank you. Thank you for your presence. As you notice, although we only have one public comment today, many of the issues that people raise are more related directly to the department than to the DCA, so it's great to have you here to listen and perhaps to respond when you can. So we'll move right along then to your report.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
So the DWR environmental team, we are continuing to organize the work effort for the environmental planning and permitting consistent with Governor Newsom's direction to pursue a single tunnel solution to modernizing and rehabilitating the water distribution system in the Delta. And our efforts are following a number of different tracks. One of them is that we are working on robust public involvement. And as part of that, we are participating in listening sessions, and we're planning upcoming activities for the next several years. For the environmental analysis, we are working on identifying processes to get the work started. We're still at very early stages, and our preliminary schedule is that we'd like to formally start the California Environmental Quality Act process by publishing the Notice of Preparation, or the NOP, at the end of this year. The other major effort that's going on is the public negotiation process with the state water contractors. And the idea is to develop a methodology and a conceptual approach to the cost allocation and associated financial and water management matters related to Delta Conveyance. That would result in an agreement in principle, and that would be between DWR and the public water agencies for inclusion in the NOP that we're working on at the end of this year. This is one step in the process. It does not constitute any type of approval on Delta Conveyance. It's just a concept, and neither approval of Delta Conveyance or the agreement can happen until after CEQA is complete.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Thank you. General Counsel's report?
Thanks, President Estromera. So my written report is in your packet. There were a couple of items that I wanted to note. First, on the ongoing procurements, one issue that we're looking at is making sure that we're incorporating best practices to get the word out there and getting as many and as the maximum number and quality of responses we can get. So we're continuing to fine-tune that process as we move forward. The second issue I wanted to mention is just the Stakeholder Engagement Committee. So we had a little bit of discussion at our last meeting. We continue to have discussions on that committee, and I'm very hopeful and confident that we will have a draft for the board's consideration by the September meeting. And I know there have been some interest expressed by directors to be involved in that process as soon as possible. And of course, we will provide that to you for your input and concern as soon as possible, but consistent with the Brown Act constraints. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Josh. Any questions? Okay. So as soon as we have a draft, we'll circulate it and hopefully we'll be able to agendize it for September meeting. Thank you, Josh. Treasurer's report?
Thank you, President Estromera. My report is in your package, and the report actually contains some information regarding things that happened after July 31st. The only thing I have to add to that is that hot off the press today, we did receive a wire from the state controller for payment of invoice 22, and that was important to us because that's the payment that's associated with the lease. And so we will be able to start the second part of the letter of credit and then replenish the DCA funds that were advanced for the first letter of credit and for the first month's rent. So we'll be able to replenish those funds, and then we'll be able to pay for the excess tenant improvement costs. So we have that money today.
Excellent.
Good news.
When is our proposed move-in part again? And you probably said before, but
Yeah, we're on target now for the first week in January.
okay, good, thank you.
And that's all I have.
Thank you, June. Questions?
No, congratulations.
Okay, great. Yes.
Good work,
Good.
good work.
Good news.
Yeah.
Any verbal reports? Did we leave anything out? No verbal reports? Okay, well, great. Thank you all very much. Any future agenda items?
Then I want to see those corridors.
Oh, yeah. Don't we all? Okay, there being no suggestions then for future agenda items, we'll have enough of them for September. So we'll adjourn until our September 19th regular board meeting. Thank you all. Good afternoon. Stand adjourned.